Mountain Monsters has investigated hundreds of locations, faced bears, dangerous terrain, extreme weather, but one episode never aired. September 2019, deep in Kentucky mountains hunting the Yahoo, something went horribly wrong. The crew was attacked, not scared, attacked. Wild Bill hit by rock, cracked rib. Huckleberry grabbed and thrown 5 feet. Marcus's arm slashed, 3 parallel cuts. 4 crew members hospitalized in one night, all captured on camera. Subscribe because Travel Channel banned this episode permanently. The footage is too violent, too real, too disturbing for television. Creatures charged them. Physical contact, documented injuries, medical records prove it. This wasn't entertainment. This was survival, the most violent cryptid encounter ever filmed, and the network decided you should never see it. This is what really happened during the banned Mountain Monsters episode, and why some hunts aren't worth the risk. Devil's Creek Hollow sits in the remote mountains of Pike County, eastern Kentucky, deep in Appalachian territory. The area is accessible only by rough logging roads that wind through dense forest. Steep ridges surround the hollow. Cave systems penetrate the mountains. The nearest town is 40 minutes away on treacherous roads. Cell phone service doesn't exist. The local population is sparse and secretive about what lives in those mountains. The Yahoo is a regional cryptid reported for generations across Appalachia. Unlike the typically shy Pacific Northwest Bigfoot, the Yahoo is known for extreme territorial aggression. Described as 7 to 8 feet tall and covered in reddish-brown hair, it's blamed for multiple livestock killings over decades. Several hunters have reported being chased from the area. One hunter was hospitalized in the 1990s after an encounter, though he refused to discuss details. Locals genuinely fear Devil's Creek Hollow. Many won't enter after dark. In August 2019, multiple recent sightings reached the Ames team. A local farmer's cattle were mutilated in ways that didn't match bear or cougar attacks. Strange vocalizations were recorded by campers. Massive tracks measuring 19 inches were found near the creek. Elaborate tree structures appeared overnight. The pattern suggested an active, aggressive creature. Desperate locals contacted Mountain Monsters directly, asking for help. Before the investigation began, warning signs appeared. Local residents warned the team repeatedly, "Don't go up there after dark. That thing don't run from people. It hunts people." Most significantly, a Native American elder visited their base camp. "You're making a mistake," he told Buck directly. "This one is different. It's territorial and violent. You should leave." The team dismissed the warnings as superstition and local fear. The full Ames team deployed for the investigation. Buck Lowe led as team leader. Wild Bill, Huckleberry, Jeff Headley, and Willie McQuillian comprised the core team. The production crew totaled 8 people, including multiple camera operators, a sound technician, and a producer on site. They brought complete equipment: thermal imaging, night vision, audio recorders, trail cameras, and communication gear. The investigation plan covered 3 nights. Night 1 for reconnaissance and evidence gathering. Night 2 for building traps and setting cameras. Night 3 for active hunting. Base camp was established at the hollow's entrance. Teams would split coverage for efficiency and coordinate via radio. Medical kits were on standby as standard procedure. From the beginning, the atmosphere felt wrong. Wild Bill commented immediately, "This place feels wrong." The forest was unnaturally quiet with no bird sounds or insect noise. An oppressive feeling hung in the air. Even experienced crew members felt nervous. But Buck decided to proceed. "We've handled worse," he said confidently. They hadn't handled anything like what was waiting for them in Devil's Creek Hollow. At 8 p.m., the team split into 2 groups. Buck, Wild Bill, and Willie headed north toward the ridge. Huckleberry, Jeff, and a camera operator took the south approach through the valley. The producer and remaining crew stayed at base camp. Radio check confirmed communication was working. The sun was setting fast in the hollow and temperature was dropping rapidly. Everyone felt uneasy but proceeded anyway. By 8:45, Buck's team discovered massive footprints crossing a muddy section near the creek. The prints measured 19 inches long with 5 distinct toes. Deep impressions suggested something weighing over 600 pounds. The stride length indicated 7 to 8 foot steps between prints, too large for human, too humanoid for bear. Buck examined them closely. "These are the biggest I've ever seen, and they're fresh, maybe within the last hour." At 9:15, they found elaborate tree structures, 8-foot logs stacked deliberately in patterns, fresh breaks on branches, saplings bent and woven together. These structures were far more complex than typical Bigfoot markers. They suggested high intelligence and very recent activity. Something built this today, Buck said quietly. The realization was unsettling. The first unusual occurrence came at 9:30. Loud crashing sounds erupted from the brush approximately 50 yards from the team. Something large was moving parallel to their position, keeping pace as they walked. Wild Bill stopped the team. Something's tracking us. They listened carefully. The crashing stopped immediately when they stopped. When the team resumed walking, the sounds resumed, matching their pace exactly. By 9:50, deep guttural howls echoed from the ridge above them. The sound was unlike any animal they recognized. Not bear, not cougar, not coyote. Before they could process it, a second howl answered from the opposite direction. The team realized with growing dread that they were positioned between at least two of them. Huckleberry's team radioed that they were hearing the same vocalizations coming from multiple directions around their position. "They're communicating about us," Jeff said nervously. Huckleberry scanned with the thermal camera at 10:10. Multiple large heat signatures appeared on the screen, at least 3, possibly 4 distinct sources. They were moving in a coordinated pattern, staying just outside clear visual range at approximately 200 yards out. The signatures were circling both teams systematically. "They're surrounding us," Huckleberry reported over radio, his voice tense. Buck made an immediate decision. He radioed both teams. "Everyone back to base camp. Slow and steady, stay together." This wasn't panic, but tactical retreat. He didn't want teams separated with coordinated creatures watching their every move. Between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., the team settled into camp for the night. Tents were set up in a clearing with the generator running to power lights and equipment. A perimeter was established with portable lights. Buck and Wild Bill took the first watch while the rest of the team tried to sleep. The forest remained eerily quiet, with no normal night sounds whatsoever. At 1:15 a.m., the generator suddenly died. All lights went out immediately, plunging the camp into complete darkness. Buck went to investigate and found the fuel line deliberately cut with a clean slice, not animal damage. "Someone or something sabotaged this," he announced. The team went on high alert immediately. Within minutes, flashlights revealed multiple sets of eyes reflecting from the tree line. They completely surrounded the camp from at least 5 or 6 positions. The eyes were 8 to 9 feet off the ground, far too high for any normal animal. They just watched without approaching. The team armed themselves and formed a defensive circle. The eyes would disappear when flashlights pointed directly at them, then reappear in different locations. They were moving around the perimeter, testing the camp's response. This was intelligent, calculated behavior. "They're hunting us," Wild Bill said quietly, "testing our defenses." At 1:35, large rocks began being thrown into camp from multiple directions. The rocks landed near tents but weren't hitting anyone deliberately. This was intimidation. One rock the size of a softball landed 3 feet from a camera operator. The crew was starting to panic. At 1:42, camera operator Marcus went to his tent to grab equipment. The team heard him scream, "Something grabbed me!" Everyone rushed over to find Marcus pale and shaking violently. 3 parallel scratches ran down his arm, bleeding. He explained that something had grabbed his arm from outside the tent and pulled him backward. The grip was incredibly strong. He pulled free and saw a massive hand covered in dark hair before it disappeared. The medic examined Marcus immediately. The scratches were 3 parallel marks, 4 inches long each, deep enough to draw blood. The spacing suggested a very large hand, not bear claws, not human nails, something in between. The team pulled everyone into the center of camp. No one was allowed near the perimeter. Buck tried to radio for extraction, but communications were dead. The satellite phone was also not working. They were completely cut off from the outside with no way to call for help. The generator was sabotaged. Communications were disabled. They were surrounded by multiple intelligent creatures showing coordinated behavior and willingness to make physical contact. From 2 a.m. until 5:15, when dawn finally broke, the team huddled together. Constant sounds came from the perimeter, heavy footsteps circling, breathing audible in the darkness. Occasional glimpses of massive figures moving just beyond the light. No one slept. Everyone was terrified. When first light came, the creatures melted back into the forest. Examination of the perimeter revealed dozens of massive footprints surrounding the entire camp. They had been playing with the team all night. Morning daylight revealed the full extent of the night's events. The generator fuel line showed a deep, deliberate slash. Multiple equipment items were moved, knocked over, or damaged. Food supplies were scattered across camp. The message was clear: we can reach anything. Footprint casts were made from the clearest prints. They measured 18 to 20 inches long, with depth suggesting 500 to 700 pounds. At least 6 different sets were identified. proving multiple individuals working together in coordinated patterns around the camp. Marcus's scratches were cleaned, bandaged, and photographed extensively. The spacing between marks measured 3 inches. The depth was a 1/4 inch into his skin. Pattern analysis showed 4 fingers plus thumb with a hand span of 9 to 10 inches minimum. This was consistent with a massive humanoid hand, not any known animal. The producer called for medical extraction for Marcus. Marcus refused to leave. "I'm not going through those woods alone, and you need the camera crew." He stayed despite being clearly traumatized, jumping at every sound. Buck called an emergency meeting at 9 a.m. Should they continue or abort? Arguments for leaving included the physical attack, crew injury, and seriously compromised safety. Arguments for staying included only 1 night remaining, incredible evidence already captured, and the belief that daylight hours should be safe. The production company via satellite phone pressured them to continue. "Can you make it 1 more night?" Buck reluctantly agreed, but set strict conditions. Everyone stays together. No split teams, no one goes anywhere alone, full perimeter lighting, backup generator, weapons loaded and ready. At first sign of danger, immediate extraction. We're not risking lives for footage. During daylight, Jeff and Huckleberry, scouting near camp, found a cave system 200 yards away. Large openings with fresh tracks leading inside. A massive nest of branches inside the entrance. "We camped right in their territory," Jeff realized. This explained the aggressive territorial behavior. The creatures were defending their home. That made the coming night even more dangerous. At 7:30 p.m., the entire team deployed together. No split teams this time. Full lighting perimeter was active with the backup generator running. All cameras were positioned. The team formed a defensive formation and waited. Anxiety was extremely high. For the first hour and a half, nothing happened. The silence was too quiet, unnatural, no forest sounds at all. The team was on edge, waiting for something. The calm before the storm feeling was palpable. At 9:15, a massive figure stepped into the light range at the edge of the perimeter. 9 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown hair with a muscular build. It stood completely still, staring directly at the team for nearly 3 minutes. This was challenge behavior. Then it stepped back into darkness and disappeared. Between 9:20 and 10 p.m., different creatures appeared at different positions around the perimeter. They showed themselves briefly, then vanished. This was coordinated display, establishing dominance. "There's at least 5 of them," Buck counted. At 10:15, large rocks were suddenly thrown from multiple directions simultaneously. Dozens of them hit tents and equipment. One destroyed a camera. Another grazed the sound technician's shoulder. This was a coordinated attack. At 10:18, a rock the size of a baseball hit Wild Bill's back between his shoulder blades. He went down hard. The team rushed to him as he lay conscious but unable to breathe properly. Rocks were still being thrown all around them. Someone yelled, "Get to the vehicles!" Buck shouted, "Everyone move now!" They grabbed Wild Bill and began retreating. At 10:22, as the team moved toward vehicles, a massive creature charged from the tree line. 8 feet tall and enormous, it ran directly at them. The team scattered. Huckleberry tripped and fell. The creature was heading straight for him. The creature reached Huckleberry, grabbed his backpack, and lifted him completely off the ground. It threw him 5 feet through the air. Huckleberry hit the ground hard. The creature stood over him as Huckleberry screamed. Buck fired his gun into the air. The gunshot made the creature pause. It looked at Buck, made a decision, then released Huckleberry. It backed away slowly, never breaking eye contact with Buck, then turned and disappeared into darkness within seconds. The team grabbed Huckleberry. He was conscious but terrified, his back injured from being thrown. Wild Bill was still in severe pain. "Get in the trucks now!" Everyone ran, abandoning all equipment. Their only goal was getting out alive. They reached the vehicles and piled in frantically. Engines started. The headlights revealed multiple large figures watching them leave. The creatures didn't pursue. Their mission was accomplished. Territory defended. The team escaped at 10:28 p.m., speeding down the mountain road, leaving everything behind. 2 crew members were seriously injured. The most violent encounter mountain monsters ever documented was over, but the consequences were just beginning. The 2 trucks sped down mountain roads for 40 minutes to reach Pike County Medical Center. Everyone was silent except for groans of pain. Wild Bill could barely breathe. Huckleberry's back was seizing up. Marcus's scratches were bleeding through his bandage. The sound technician's shoulder was swelling rapidly. At 11:15 p.m., they reached the emergency room. 4 team members required immediate treatment. Wild Bill was taken for x-rays. His diagnosis: cracked rib with severe bruising across his back showing impact pattern consistent with a large rock. The doctor said, "You're lucky it's not worse. That rock hit with serious force." He was prescribed pain medication and restricted from activity for 2 weeks. Huckleberry's examination revealed severe lower back strain, possible herniated disc, and whiplash from being thrown. Bruising covered his shoulders and back where the creature grabbed him. The bruises were handprint-shaped, measuring 10 to 11 inches in span, much larger than any human hand. Medical staff photographed and measured them, confused about what could have grabbed him with such force. Marcus's scratches showed signs of infection 24 hours later. Antibiotics were prescribed. The wounds were deeper than initially thought. The 3 parallel marks would scar permanently, leaving him with proof of what attacked him. The producer arrived at the hospital with network executives on conference call. They discussed liability concerns, insurance questions, and legal implications. 4 injured crew members with documented physical attacks created serious complications. Willie reviewed the footage in the hospital waiting room. The rock throwing was clearly visible. The creature charging Huckleberry was captured on camera. Physical contact was documented. Huckleberry being thrown was visible. The creature standing over him was filmed. "This is the most violent encounter ever filmed," Willie said quietly. Network executives immediately expressed concern. This went beyond entertainment. People were genuinely hurt. Do we air this? Legal teams began reviewing footage. Insurance companies started investigating. OSHA became potentially involved. The evidence was undeniable, but the question became, what should be done about it? Network lawyers reviewed all footage and identified multiple liability issues. Crew members were injured during production, making the company potentially liable. Workers' compensation claims were likely. OSHA violations were possible. The insurance company denied coverage, invoking acts of nature exclusions. Legal exposure was too great. The violence factor was unprecedented. This episode showed real physical attacks, not implied danger. Actual documented violence with people genuinely hurt on camera. This was different from typical Mountain Monsters content. It crossed the line from investigation to assault. Network standards determined it was too intense for television. Travel Channel's brand image was at stake. The network was known for paranormal entertainment, not graphic violence. This episode showed people being attacked, injured seriously, and traumatized psychologically. Sponsors might object. The reputation could be damaged. It didn't fit their brand. Internal ethical debates questioned whether profiting from crew injuries was exploitation. The team went through genuine trauma for entertainment purposes. Was it ethical to broadcast that? The network chose ethics over potential profit. Buck initially wanted the episode to air. People need to see what's out there. This is proof. But after reflection, he changed his mind. My team got hurt. Marcus, Wild Bill, Huckleberry injured. Maybe some things aren't worth proving. He supported the network's decision. Team members' views were divided. Some wanted evidence shown. We went through that. People should see. Others were traumatized. I don't want to relive it. Don't want my pain as entertainment. Huckleberry especially opposed airing footage of being physically attacked and thrown. Too personal, too traumatic. In November 2019, Travel Channel officially banned the episode. It will never air on television. Footage was archived but not destroyed, kept from the public. Team members signed NDAs about specific details. The general story could be discussed, but not graphic footage details. The network issued a vague public statement. Due to production complications, the episode will not air. No specifics were given. Fans speculated wildly and rumors spread, but the truth remained hidden until now. In March 2020, an anonymous crew member posted on Reddit claiming to have worked on Mountain Monsters. They described the Kentucky incident. Crew was attacked. People got hurt. Episode banned. The post was deleted quickly, but screenshots spread everywhere. Hospital records leaked online with names redacted, but injuries documented. 4 patients treated the same night from incident at Devil's Creek Hollow. Cracked rib, back injury, lacerations. This corroborated the Reddit post. Proof something really happened. A small Pike County newspaper article from September 2019 was found. Television crew injured during filming. 4 transported to hospital. Wildlife encounter suspected. The article confirmed the date and location, matching all leaked information. Wild Bill posted cryptically in October 2019. Sometimes the hunt hunts you back. Huckleberry went dark on social media for 3 months. Marcus left Mountain Monsters permanently, never returning to the crew. The trauma was too severe. Buck Lowe was never the same after Kentucky. He became more cautious as a leader, questioning every investigation. Is this worth risking my team? He won't ignore warnings anymore. The elder told them not to go. They should have listened. Wild Bill's rib healed within months, but psychological impact remained. He's more hesitant on investigations now, constantly checking surroundings. That night changed me. Realize these things can kill us. We're not invincible. Huckleberry's back problems persist years later. He required physical therapy for months and still has occasional pain. The handprint bruises took weeks to fade, but the memory never fades. Being grabbed by that thing, thrown like I weighed nothing, that strength was inhuman. He focuses on technology now, keeping distance. I've been close enough. Don't need to experience that again. Marcus never returned to paranormal work. He took camera jobs on nature documentaries. I'm done with cryptids. Almost died in those woods. He can't watch mountain monsters anymore without triggering anxiety attacks. Mountain Monsters protocols were completely overhauled. Enhanced safety measures, medical personnel on every shoot, satellite phones mandatory, emergency extraction plans required, hazard assessments before each hunt. The banned episode changed how the show operates permanently. The episode remains banned with no plans to ever release it despite fan demand. Legal reasons remain valid. Footage exists in a vault with heavily restricted access. Only lawyers and executives have seen it. What we know for certain: 4 crew members injured, medical records documented. Physical attacks occurred and were captured on camera. The episode was completed. Network chose not to air it. The ban remains in effect. This was the most violent encounter the show ever documented. The lesson learned: not all cryptids are passive. Some are territorial and violent. Yahoos are different from typical Bigfoot. Warnings should be heeded. Safety over evidence. People over profit. Some hunts should be abandoned. Devil's Creek Hollow remains off limits. Mountain monsters will never return there. Something unprecedented just happened. Minutes ago, the remaining crew members of Mountain Monsters released a joint statement about an incident that's haunted them since 2019, an encounter so disturbing that it caused production to shut down for 8 months and left the team questioning whether they should continue hunting at all. For years, fans noticed something changed after Season 7. The energy was different. The crew seemed more cautious, more serious, less willing to venture into certain areas. Team members who used to charge fearlessly into the woods now hesitated at tree lines, and one location, a place they simply call the Hollow, was permanently marked as off-limits, with no explanation ever given, until now. The statement was posted simultaneously across all crew members' personal social media accounts, not the official show accounts, but their personal pages, suggesting this wasn't sanctioned by the network. The post was simple, direct, and chilling. We need to tell you what really happened in the Hollow. We need to tell you why we almost quit. We need to tell you what followed us home. Before we go further, subscribe now if you're fascinated by cryptids and the unexplained, because what the Mountain Monsters crew is about to reveal will change everything you thought you knew about what's lurking in Appalachia. The statement began with an apology from John Trapper Tice, the team leader who's been investigating Appalachian monsters for over 40 years. "We've always been honest with y'all about what we encounter out there," Trapper wrote, his usual confidence replaced with something heavier. "But there's one hunt we've never talked about, one creature we tracked that we can't explain, and one night that broke something in all of us." He was referring to March 2019, during what was supposed to be a routine investigation in the hills of southern West Virginia. The team had received reports of livestock mutilations, standard stuff for them. Farmers described finding cattle drained of blood with surgical precision cuts that didn't match any known predator. Worse, witnesses reported seeing something that walked on 2 legs, stood over 7 feet tall, and moved through the forest without making a sound. The crew assumed they were tracking a Grassman variant or possibly a rogue Sasquatch. They'd dealt with dozens of these investigations. This should have been straightforward. "We were wrong," Trapper wrote. "We were so damn wrong." The team, Trapper, Jeff, Willie, Wild Bill, and Huckleberry, arrived at the location on March 23, 2019, just after sunset. Local law enforcement had advised them not to go, which was unusual. Cops in Appalachia are generally supportive of the Ames team, often sharing information and helping with access to remote areas. But the sheriff who met them at the trailhead was different. He was nervous, kept looking over his shoulder at the tree line, and spoke in a low voice, as if afraid something might hear him. "You boys need to understand something," the sheriff told them, according to Wild Bill's account. "This ain't like your other hunts. People don't come back right from that hollow. Some don't come back at all." When Willie asked what he meant by "don't come back right," the sheriff just shook his head and walked away. But before he left, he turned back and said something that none of them forgot. "If you hear it calling your names, don't answer. No matter how much it sounds like someone you know, don't you dare answer." The team laughed it off at the time. They'd heard plenty of local superstitions, but as Jeff wrote in his portion of the statement, "We should have listened. God help us. We should have turned around right then." The first 3 hours of the investigation were normal. They set up thermal cameras, deployed motion sensors, and split into 2 groups to cover more ground. The forest was unusually quiet. No birds, no insects, no ambient wildlife sounds, but that often happened in areas with apex predators. Around 11:47 p.m., Huckleberry's radio crackled with Wild Bill's voice. "We got tracks, fresh ones, you need to see this." The team regrouped at Wild Bill's location, where they found prints unlike anything they'd encountered before. They were roughly humanoid, but wrong. The toes were too long, the heel too narrow, and the depth of the impression suggested something far heavier than a human but distributed differently than a bear or primate. The prints went deep, Willie explained in his statement. Real deep. Like whatever made them was carrying enormous weight. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. They were perfectly silent. We found tracks showing this thing had walked within 20 feet of our position, and none of us heard a damn thing. They followed the tracks deeper into the hollow, the terrain becoming steeper and more treacherous. The trees grew denser, blocking out the moonlight. Their flashlight beams seemed to get swallowed by the darkness, not penetrating as far as they should. That's when Jeff heard his name. Jeff, Jeffrey. It was his mother's voice, crystal clear, coming from deeper in the woods. The same tone she'd used when he was a child, calling him home for dinner. The problem? Jeff's mother had been dead for 3 years. I froze, Jeff wrote. Every rational part of my brain knew it wasn't real, knew my mama was gone, but it sounded exactly like her. Same voice, same inflection, same slight accent, and it was calling me home. Trapper grabbed Jeff's arm, stopping him from walking toward the voice. "Don't," Trapper said, remembering the sheriff's warning. But then they all heard it. Different voices, calling different names. Wild Bill heard his late father. Willie heard his ex-wife. Huckleberry heard his childhood best friend who died in a car accident in 1987. And Trapper heard something that made him go pale. He heard his own voice calling to him from the darkness. "It was me," Trapper wrote. "My voice, my words, my cadence, calling out to the team, telling them I'd found the creature, telling them to follow me deeper into the hollow. But I was standing right there. I wasn't the one talking. Something else was using my voice." The team huddled together, backs to each other, flashlights sweeping the tree line. The voices continued, growing more insistent, more desperate. Jeff's mother began pleading with him to come help her. She was hurt. She needed him. Wild Bill's father started getting angry, demanding to know why his son was ignoring him. Then the voices started overlapping, creating a chorus of the dead and the duplicated, all calling from the darkness. That's when Wild Bill's thermal camera picked up something that made him lower the device and stare at the screen in disbelief. There were 7 heat signatures surrounding us, Wild Bill recounted. 7 human-shaped thermal readings, standing just beyond the tree line, completely still. We counted ourselves, 5 people. We were surrounded by something that was warm-blooded, man-sized, and perfectly motionless. Jeff made the decision to use the flare camera to get a better look. He raised it, aimed at the nearest signature, and looked through the viewfinder. What he saw made him drop the camera. It looked like Trapper, Jeff wrote, his words conveying the horror even through text. Standing there in the trees, wearing Trapper's clothes. Same build, same stance. But its head was tilted at an angle that wasn't right, and it was smiling. Not a human smile. Too wide, too many teeth, like something that had studied smiling but didn't understand the emotion behind it. Jeff spun around to confirm Trapper was still with the group. He was, standing right there, very much not smiling. But when Jeff looked back through the FLIR, the Trapper thing was closer. It had moved 15 feet in the 2 seconds Jeff had looked away, and it had done so in complete silence. "Run," Trapper commanded, and the team didn't question him. They ran back the way they came, or tried to. The trail had changed. Landmarks they'd noted on the way in were gone. The path they'd followed was no longer there, replaced by dense undergrowth that looked like it had been undisturbed for decades. Behind them, the voices followed, but now they were changing, distorting. Jeff's mother began speaking in his voice. Wild Bill's father started sounding like Willie. The voices were blending, shifting, learning. "We realized it wasn't trying to lure us separately," Willie explained. "It was learning us. Learning our voices, our patterns, our relationships. It was studying how we communicated so it could replicate us better." The team became disoriented in the darkness, unable to find their way out. Every direction looked the same. Every trail led in circles, and the thermal signatures kept appearing on their cameras, always just at the edge of visibility, always perfectly still until they looked away. Huckleberry, the team's tracker and navigator, made a disturbing discovery. "We kept crossing our own footprints," he wrote. "But some of the prints were facing the wrong direction, like we'd walked the same path backward, or like something else had been walking in our footsteps, matching our stride perfectly. At 2:33 a.m., They stumbled into a small clearing. In the center was a circle of stones arranged in a pattern none of them recognized. And standing around the circle were the figures, all 7 of them. 5 looked like perfect copies of the team members. Same clothing, same equipment, same physical appearance, but something was wrong with their proportions. Their arms hung slightly too long, their necks bent at angles that suggested too many vertebrae. Their eyes reflected the flashlight beams like an animal's, bright and unnatural. The other 2 figures were incomplete. One had Trapper's face, but Wild Bill's body. The other had features that kept shifting, flickering between different team members as if it couldn't decide which one to mimic. They didn't attack us, Trapper wrote. They just stood there, watching, breathing in sync with us. When Jeff took a step back, his copy took a step back. When Willie raised his flashlight, his copy raised its arm at the exact same time. They were mirroring us, and I realized with absolute horror that they were waiting to get it right, waiting to perfect their imitation. Wild Bill, always the bravest and most impulsive, shouted at the creatures, "What the hell are you?" The Trapper copy tilted its head further, that too wide smile growing impossibly wider, and spoke in Trapper's exact voice. "We are what remains when you leave. We are what fills the space you occupied. We are the echo that doesn't fade." Then all 7 figures spoke in unison, using all 5 team members' voices simultaneously. "You've been here before. You'll be here again. You never really leave." That's when Huckleberry noticed something that made his blood run cold. Behind the stone circle, in the darkness beyond the clearing, were more figures, dozens of them. Some looked like hikers, wearing clothing from different decades. Some looked like hunters in old-fashioned gear. Some looked like people who'd been lost in these woods long ago. And they were all standing perfectly still, faces blank, eyes reflecting the light, waiting. "The Hollow collects," Trapper wrote. "That's what we understood in that moment. The Hollow collects people, not their bodies, but their patterns, their essence. It creates copies and keeps them there, trapped in a loop of existence, forever walking the same paths, forever calling out to new visitors, forever adding to its collection." The team ran again, this time with pure survival instinct overriding everything else. They crashed through underbrush, fell down slopes, ignored injuries and exhaustion. Behind them, they could hear footsteps, multiple sets of footsteps, matching their pace perfectly. Jeff glanced back once and saw his own face running behind him, keeping pace, mirroring his movements exactly, except for that horrible wrong smile. They burst out of the tree line at 4:17 a.m., nearly 7 hours after they'd entered. Their vehicles were there, untouched, but something was wrong. The sheriff was still there, sitting in his patrol car, watching the woods. "You boys made it out," the sheriff said, but he didn't sound relieved. He sounded disappointed, resigned. "Most don't first time." "First time?" Willie demanded. "What the hell do you mean, first time?" The sheriff looked at each of them carefully, studying their faces, their mannerisms. "Just making sure all of you came back," he said cryptically. "Sometimes something else comes out wearing their faces. You can usually tell by the eyes. The copies never get the eyes quite right." He drove away without another word, leaving the team standing there, looking at each other with sudden suspicion and horror. How would they know if one of them wasn't really them anymore? The aftermath was worse than the encounter itself. "We all started experiencing the same thing," Jeff wrote. "We'd see ourselves, not in mirrors that we could dismiss as stress, but out in the world. I'd be at the grocery store and catch a glimpse of myself in the parking lot, standing perfectly still, watching me from between cars." Wild Bill said he saw himself standing in his backyard at 3 a.m. just staring at his house. Willie's neighbors asked why he was walking around his block at midnight when Willie had been asleep in bed. The team tried to return to normal filming, but the encounters continued. During a hunt in Kentucky 2 months later, Trapper's audio recorder picked up his own voice, whispering things he'd never said. In Tennessee, Huckleberry's motion-activated camera captured footage of Huckleberry walking past the camera, while Huckleberry was asleep in the tent 50 yards away. "We couldn't tell anyone," Trapper explained. "How do you explain to a production company that you might have brought something back, that there might be copies of us out there, getting better at imitating us, learning our lives, studying how to replace us?" The team consulted with experts, not cryptozoologists or paranormal investigators, but psychologists, neurologists, anyone who might explain what they were experiencing. The consensus was stress-induced hallucinations brought on by a shared traumatic experience. But then came the incident that forced them to speak out. 3 weeks ago, Jeff's wife called him in a panic. She'd been at home alone when she heard the front door open. She called out, thinking it was Jeff coming home early. Footsteps walked down the hall. She heard breathing outside the bedroom door. Then Jeff's voice, "Honey, I'm home." But Jeff was at a team meeting 3 hours away. He had witnesses. He was definitely not at home. His wife, terrified, locked herself in the bathroom and called the police. When officers arrived, they found the front door unlocked, muddy footprints leading down the hall to the bedroom door, then stopping. The prints matched Jeff's boots exactly. Same size, same wear pattern, same unique scuff on the left sole, but the prints didn't lead back out. They just stopped, as if whoever or whatever had made them had simply ceased to exist at that spot. That's when we knew we had to go public, Jeff wrote, because whatever came back with us from the hollow, it's not content to just watch anymore. It's getting closer. It's learning our homes, our families, our lives, and we don't know how to stop it. The crew's statement ended with a warning and a plea. If you're planning to go into the Appalachian wilderness, especially the areas we've investigated, please reconsider, Trapper wrote. And if you go anyway, follow these rules. Never go alone. Never answer if you hear your name called. Never follow voices that sound familiar. If you see someone you know standing too still or smiling wrong, turn around immediately. And most importantly, if you encounter something that looks exactly like someone in your group, make sure you can account for where that person actually is before you approach it. The statement concluded with something that sent chills through every fan who read it. We've decided to continue hunting because something needs to document these creatures and warn people. But we're also continuing because we have to. Because whatever is in the hollow has part of us now. It knows us, it can find us, and the only way we stay ahead of it is by staying together, by staying alert, and by never ever going back to that place. We just hope we all stay us. Within minutes of the statement being posted, the comments exploded. Hundreds of people reported similar experiences in Appalachia. Hikers who'd seen their own doppelgangers on trails. Campers who'd heard their voices calling from the woods when they were safely in their tents. Hunters who'd encountered something that looked like their partner but moved wrong, spoke wrong, smiled wrong. One comment stood out, posted by a user with no profile picture and an account created minutes before. The Hollow thanks you for the introduction. Your faces have been very useful. We're getting better at wearing them. The comment was deleted within seconds, but not before dozens of people screenshot it. The account vanished entirely, as if it had never existed. And then, this morning, something else happened. A hiker in West Virginia posted a trail camera photo to social media. The camera had been set up to capture wildlife near a remote trail. In the photo, standing in a perfect line on the trail, were 5 figures. They were too far away to make out clearly, but their silhouettes matched the Mountain Monsters team exactly. Same heights, same builds, same postures. But according to the timestamp, the photo was taken yesterday, and according to the team's social media, they were all at a convention in Pennsylvania yesterday, 300 miles away. One commenter enhanced the image, zooming in on the figures' faces. The resolution was poor, pixelated, but you could make out enough detail to see one thing clearly. All 5 figures were smiling, the same too wide smile, the same wrong expression, and they were looking directly at the camera as if they knew it was there, as if they wanted to be seen, as if they were ready. The Mountain Monsters crew has broken their silence, but in doing so, they may have revealed something worse. Whatever is in the hollow isn't content to stay there. It's patient, it's learning, it's waiting for the right moment to step out of the forest and into the lives of the people it's been studying. And the question that haunts everyone who's read their statement is simple but terrifying. How many of the people walking around are actually people? How many are copies, echoes, things that learned to wear human faces and are now living human lives, while the originals are still trapped somewhere in the darkness, calling out names that will never be answered? The crew wanted to break their silence. They wanted to warn people. But in revealing what happened in the hollow, they may have also revealed that it's already too late, that whatever followed them out is already here, already among us, already perfecting its disguise. And maybe, just maybe, the crew members who posted that statement aren't the real ones anymore. Maybe the real Trapper, Jeff, Willie, Wild Bill, and Huckleberry are still in the hollow, still trapped, still watching their copies live their lives. How would we even know? If this story disturbed you, subscribe and share this video. Let us know in the comments if you've ever encountered your own doppelganger or heard your voice calling from somewhere you weren't. And if you ever go hiking in Appalachia, remember the crew's warning. Some things in those mountains don't just watch, they learn. They copy, they wait, and sometimes they come home with you. The Mountain Monsters crew broke their silence, but maybe silence would have been safer, because now, whatever is out there knows we're talking about it. And if there's one thing that's become clear from their statement, it's this. The things in the hollow don't like being ignored, but they love being acknowledged. And we just gave them all the acknowledgement they needed. For years, mountain monsters felt like controlled chaos, folklore, fear, and brotherhood wrapped in Appalachian darkness. Viewers laughed, jumped, and followed the Ames team deep into places most people would never dare to step. But behind the shouting and the humor, something far heavier was happening. One man on that team saw it before anyone else. Joe Huckleberry Lott wasn't just muscle or comic relief. He was the protector, the one who noticed when the woods went quiet for the wrong reasons, and according to Huckleberry, there was a season of mountain monsters so disturbing it was never allowed to air. Not delayed, not re-edited, buried, footage taken, contracts rewritten, silence enforced. What they encountered deep in the West Virginia wilderness wasn't entertainment anymore, and the moment it appeared on camera, everything changed. Subscribe now, because what Huckleberry eventually revealed suggests the real monster wasn't what they were hunting. It was the truth the network didn't want anyone to see. To most viewers of mountain monsters, Joe Huckleberry Lott was the steady presence in the chaos. While the rest of the Ames team shouted, joked, and charged headfirst into the woods, Huckleberry stayed grounded. He spoke less, he moved deliberately, and when things started to feel out of control, eyes always drifted toward him. Not because he was the loudest, but because he was the one people trusted when fear stopped being fun. Off camera, that role went even deeper. Joe Huckleberry Lott wasn't just the team's muscle or security, he was its stabilizer. Crew members have described him as the person who checked everyone's mental state after long nights, the one who stepped in when tempers flared or panic set in. When a hunt went sideways, it was Huckleberry who made the call on whether they pushed forward or pulled back. That authority didn't come from the show. It came from years of shared experience and trust. As mountain monsters grew in popularity, that responsibility only increased. The stakes rose, locations became more remote, shoots lasted longer, and the line between performance and genuine danger blurred. While viewers saw the same familiar format, those on set noticed changes in Huckleberry long before the audience did. He grew quieter between takes. He stopped joking back. Sometimes he'd wander off alone after filming, standing at the edge of the tree line as if listening for something no one else could hear. What unsettled the crew most wasn't fear, it was recognition. Huckleberry didn't act like a man imagining threats. He acted like someone who had seen patterns repeat. When others laughed things off, he didn't. When producers encouraged bigger reactions, he resisted. On one occasion, after a teammate joked about provoking whatever they were hunting, Huckleberry cut him off sharply. He warned that you don't challenge something unless you're ready for it to respond. The mood shifted instantly. That wasn't a line, it was conviction. By the mid-2010s, Huckleberry had become the emotional center of the team, and also the first to sense that the hunts were no longer just stories. Something had changed in the woods, and whatever it was, he felt it before anyone else realized the show was heading toward a breaking point. By the time Mountain Monsters reached its later seasons, something subtle but important had shifted. On the surface, the format was the same: folklore, tracking, night hunts, adrenaline, laughter. But for those paying close attention, the tone had darkened. The humor didn't land the same way. Reactions felt less exaggerated. Fear stopped feeling performative and started looking real. Crew members later admitted that the woods themselves felt different. Locations that once carried an adventurous edge now came with a heaviness that lingered even during daylight. Sounds didn't behave normally. Nights felt longer. Equipment failures became more frequent, not catastrophic, but persistent enough to raise concern. Batteries drained faster than expected. Audio picked up interference where none should exist. These weren't moments played up for drama. Many never made it to air. Joe Huckleberry Lott noticed the change immediately. He began urging the team to slow down, to stop shouting blindly into the forest, to treat certain areas with caution. What unsettled others wasn't that he was scared. It was that he seemed focused, as if he recognized something familiar in the way events were unfolding. He spoke less during filming and more during quiet moments, warning that provoking the unknown wasn't entertainment once it started reacting. There were moments when jokes died mid-sentence, times when someone would laugh only to realize no one else was smiling. On more than one occasion, filming stopped not because of weather or technical issues, but because the mood simply collapsed. The woods went quiet in a way that felt intentional. That kind of silence doesn't translate well to television, so it was usually cut, but those who were there remembered it. Fans began noticing the shift too. Online discussions pointed out that the team seemed more tense, less carefree. Huckleberry, once the reassuring presence, looked burdened. His eyes scanned tree lines instead of cameras. He flinched at sounds he would have ignored years earlier. Viewers chalked it up to age or exhaustion. They didn't know the crew was already discussing whether certain hunts should continue at all. Behind the scenes, there were quiet disagreements. Some wanted to push harder, escalate, deliver bigger moments. Others worried they were crossing from investigation into something reckless. Huckleberry was firmly in the latter camp. He believed the woods were no longer reacting to noise or or movement, they were reacting to intent. By the time production began planning what would become the unaired season, the question wasn't how to make the show bigger. It was whether the show was still in control of what it was chasing. And for the first time, that answer didn't feel like yes. The investigation that would eventually vanish from public record didn't begin with a title, a creature name, or even a clear destination. Internally, production notes for Mountain Monsters referred to it only as a numbered site, a remote stretch of Appalachian forest in southern West Virginia, far from towns, paved roads, or reliable communication. That alone was unusual. Most hunts were anchored in local legends with names people recognized. This one came with warnings instead of stories. From the start, locals were reluctant to speak on camera. A few would talk off the record, lowering their voices, refusing to give exact location. They mentioned lights drifting along ridgelines, animals found in places that didn't make sense, and a feeling that certain areas of the woods didn't want people lingering after dark. None of it fit clean folklore. It sounded more like avoidance than myth-making. The Ames team arrived expecting another difficult shoot. What they didn't expect was how quickly things felt wrong. Weather forecasts stopped matching reality. Clear nights turned into sudden fog. Winds shifted direction without warning. Electronics behaved inconsistently. Equipment that had worked for years began malfunctioning within hours of setup. These weren't dramatic failures, just enough disruption to make seasoned crew members uneasy. Joe Huckleberry Lot reacted differently than the rest. He didn't joke about it. He didn't brush it off. He started setting stricter boundaries, positioning cameras carefully, insisting on quieter movement through certain areas. When asked why, he gave the same answer repeatedly. Something about this place didn't feel random. By the first night, the mood had shifted completely. The forest felt compressed, as if sound couldn't travel the way it should. Small noises echoed too clearly. Larger sounds felt muffled. Jeff's thermal equipment picked up inconsistent heat signatures that appeared, moved unnaturally fast, then vanished before anyone could get eyes on them. Each time the team moved to investigate, the area went dead. Physical signs followed. Deep markings appeared on gear left unattended overnight. Not scratches from animals, straight, deliberate impressions that didn't match claws or tools. No one could explain how they'd been made without waking half the camp. Huckleberry stopped sleeping altogether, choosing instead to pace the perimeter until sunrise, watching the tree line as if expecting it to change shape. By the end of the first week, they had more footage than expected, and far less certainty. Whatever they were tracking wasn't behaving like an animal reacting to bait or noise. It was avoiding patterns, studying movement, adjusting. The realization settled quietly among the crew. This wasn't a hunt unfolding, it was an encounter waiting to happen. By the second week, the investigation no longer followed any familiar rhythm. Night hunts stretched longer. Movement was slower, quieter. The Ames team spoke in short sentences, conserving energy and attention. What unsettled everyone was not what they were seeing. It was what the equipment was reacting to before their eyes could catch up. On multiple nights, thermal cameras registered large heat signatures that appeared abruptly at the edge of frame, moved against the slope in ways that defied natural gait, then vanished as soon as someone tried to reposition. For Joe Huckleberry Lot, this was the breaking point between curiosity and caution. He began insisting that every camera stay rolling, even during downtime. He double-checked battery packs, repositioned audio recorders, and warned the crew not to wander off alone. This wasn't fear-driven panic. It was preparation. He behaved like someone who believed the encounter was inevitable and imminent. One night, while reviewing footage in the field tent, the team noticed something subtle but alarming. In several clips, background distortion appeared between trees, not as a clear figure but as a warping of space, like heat haze where no heat source existed. Frame-by-frame playback made it worse. The distortion moved independently of wind. It paused, it adjusted, and in one clip, it appeared to react when a camera operator shifted position, bending slightly as if tracking the lens. No one spoke for several seconds after that playback. There was no excitement, no celebration, just silence. One crew member later said that moment felt like crossing a line, the instant they realized they weren't documenting folklore anymore. They were documenting presence. Over the next 2 nights, activity intensified. Heavy movement circled the camp after midnight, slow and deliberate. Audio picked up low-frequency sounds that didn't register as animal calls. They weren't loud. They were close. Traps were triggered without activating sensors. Bait disappeared without disturbance to surrounding ground. And every time the team tried to recreate conditions for better footage, the activity stopped completely. The cameras kept rolling, though, and they caught things no one noticed in real time. Shadows that moved without a source, brief frame drops accompanied by audio distortion, and moments where the forest itself seemed to swallow light. Huckleberry stopped allowing jokes on mic. He warned that whatever they were dealing with didn't respond to noise, it responded to attention. By the end of that stretch, no one wanted to review footage alone, and the unspoken understanding among the crew was clear. Whatever had been watching them now knew it was being watched back. The final hunt didn't begin with urgency, it began with restraint. By that point, everyone understood that rushing only seemed to make things worse. The plan was simple: split into pairs, cover more ground quietly, and let the equipment do the work. Mountain monsters had used this method dozens of times before, but this night felt different the moment they stepped away from camp. Joe Huckleberry Lot paired off and moved upslope with a handheld camera and audio recorder. The forest was unnaturally still. No insects, no wind. Even their footsteps sounded muted, like the ground was absorbing noise instead of reflecting it. Minutes passed without incident. Then the radios began to crackle. At first, it was just interference, a low hiss. Then a voice cut through. Huckleberries. One word. Movement. What followed wasn't static in the usual sense. It was uneven, pulsing, as if something was breathing directly into the microphone. The sound lasted far too long to be interference. The rest of the team moved toward the signal immediately, calling out with no response. When they reached Huckleberry's location, they found him standing perfectly still, camera raised but unmoving, staring uphill between two trees. The camera was still recording. What it captured wouldn't fully register until later. A faint vertical shape stood just beyond the tree line, tall, indistinct, its outline shimmering as though the air around it was bending. It didn't advance. It didn't flee. It tilted slightly, the way a person might study something unfamiliar. Huckleberry whispered, almost involuntarily, "It's looking at us." Then it vanished. Not by running or retreating, it simply ceased to be there. In that instant, every device shut down. Cameras, audio, thermal, radios, total blackout. When power returned, the time codes had jumped forward 9 minutes. No one could account for what happened during that gap. No one remembered moving. No one remembered speaking. Back at camp, the confusion turned to unease. Several traps had been tripped without triggering sensors. Bait was gone, dragged away without tracks. Buck was shaking uncontrollably, repeating the same sentence under his breath. It was behind us. The footage was reviewed once in silence, then again, more carefully. No celebration followed, no relief. Huckleberry didn't look relieved either. He looked shaken, not excited, not triumphant. Afraid. Later, he would say the thing that haunted him most wasn't how it moved, it was that it seemed to decide. The morning after the final hunt felt wrong in a way no one could name. There was no adrenaline hangover, no relief, no joking about what they'd captured. The footage sat untouched for hours. When it was finally reviewed in the field tent, the mood turned heavy. No one argued about what they were seeing. They argued about what it meant. This wasn't something that could be cut into a dramatic episode and moved past next week. Within a day, production was halted. Not paused, halted. Calls were made that the Ames team wasn't included in. Then, unfamiliar men arrived at the site, not regular producers or editors, but outsiders carrying clipboards and sealed cases. They identified themselves vaguely and asked for everything: cameras, drives, batteries, backups, all of it. Joe Huckleberry Lot refused at first. One camera in particular. He said it wasn't ready to be seen, that it needed contact. The response was immediate and cold: hand it over or risk removal from the show entirely. The decision was made for him. The camera was taken from his bunk while he was away. What followed felt less like television and more like containment. Every storage device was logged, sealed, and packed without explanation. No one said where it was going. No one said when it would return. By that evening, the team was instructed to suspend all filming pending review. Within days, updated non-disclosure agreements arrived, far stricter than anything they'd signed before. For the first time in its history, Mountain Monsters didn't just stop production. It vanished from the schedule. Calls went unanswered. Paychecks stalled. And slowly, the realization set in. This wasn't about editing choices or network tone. Whatever was on those tapes had crossed a line. Huckleberry understood it before anyone else said it out loud. The show wasn't being delayed, it was being erased. Once the footage was taken, the strangest part wasn't what happened next. It was what didn't happen. There was no follow-up meeting, no explanation from the network, no reassurance that production would resume. Mountain Monsters simply went quiet. Calls from the Ames team went unanswered. Emails disappeared into silence. The momentum that had carried the show for years stopped overnight. Within weeks, the strain began to fracture the crew. The brotherhood that had survived years of long nights and dangerous hunts started to thin under pressure. Some members withdrew completely, avoiding contact and refusing to talk about the trip. Others tried to move on, hoping the silence meant the footage would eventually resurface. But Joe Huckleberry Lot couldn't let it go. He believed what they encountered didn't stay in the woods. He began connecting dots. Reports from locals near the filming area describing similar distortions, odd equipment failures, and sudden stillness in the forest. The stories echoed what the team had experienced almost word for word. To Huckleberry, it felt like confirmation. Whatever they had filmed wasn't bound to one place. Legal pressure followed, quietly at first, then directly. New warnings made it clear that any mention of the unaired season, the location, or the footage would trigger immediate action. Silence wasn't suggested. It was enforced. Faced with real consequences, most of the crew chose to walk away. That decision broke something. The show wasn't just canceled. The shared purpose that had defined the Ames team dissolved with it. To the public, the disappearance of mountain monsters looked routine. To those who lived it, it felt deliberate. Huckleberry later said the hardest part wasn't losing the show. It was realizing that the evidence they fought to capture, proof that they weren't just chasing legends, had been taken out of their hands. And once that happened, the hunt wasn't theirs anymore. For years after mountain monsters vanished, Joe Huckleberry Lott kept his distance. He still appeared at conventions, still smiled for photos, but anyone who asked about the missing season was met with a polite deflection. To the public, it looked like loyalty to contracts or respect for the network. To those who knew him, it felt more like caution. That silence finally cracked years later, and not in a way anyone expected. Huckleberry agreed to appear on a small paranormal podcast with a limited audience. There was no hype, no marketing push, no warning that anything significant would be said. At first, the conversation stayed safe. Memories, laughs, old hunts. Then the hosts asked about the season that never aired. Huckleberry didn't deny it. He paused. His voice dropped. He confirmed that an entire investigation existed that viewers had never seen. He didn't name the location or describe the footage directly, but his language changed. He said what they captured wasn't something you edit around. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was wrong. When one host laughed nervously, Huckleberry stopped him cold. He said the thing they encountered didn't behave like an animal reacting to bait or noise. It reacted to intention. It moved with awareness, and it knew they were there before they knew it was watching. That wasn't fear speaking. It was certainty. Within hours, clips from the interview spread online. Fans dissected every word. But less than 2 days later, the entire episode disappeared. Not just one upload, every version, across every platform. The hosts later claimed they'd received legal notices demanding immediate removal. Huckleberry never commented on the takedown. He never returned for a follow-up. After that, his online presence went dark. Social media pages stopped updating. Messages from fans went unanswered. Those close to him said he became more guarded, more withdrawn. He still believed the footage mattered, but he also believed there were consequences for pushing too hard. For many fans, that brief interview changed everything. It confirmed what rumors had hinted at for years. The lost season wasn't shelved for creative reasons. It was buried, and the fact that even a careful, measured admission triggered immediate silence suggested something far more serious than a canceled TV show. Huckleberry hadn't broken his silence to tell a story. He'd broken it to issue a warning. In the years since that brief confession, Joe Huckleberry Lott has avoided the subject almost entirely. When asked about the missing season of Mountain Monsters, he redirects, smiles politely, and changes the topic. Those closest to him say it isn't fear of contracts anymore, it's acceptance. Whatever happened in those woods, he believes it can't be undone by exposure. Occasionally, fragments resurface. A grainy clip, a whispered line, each vanishes as quickly as it appears. Fans argue over authenticity, but the pattern never changes. Appearance, removal, silence. Huckleberry has acknowledged none of it. The only statement he's repeated, quietly and without drama, is that some things aren't meant to be chased once they've been seen. The show didn't end with answers. It ended with a boundary. According to Huckleberry, the real danger wasn't the figure in the trees. It was what followed when the evidence was taken away and everyone was told to forget. Mountain Monsters didn't conclude with closure. It concluded with a warning. If the truth disappears that easily, maybe it was never meant to be entertainment at all. According to Jacob Buck Lowe, what happened behind the cameras was never meant to be part of a TV show. Footage disappeared. Investigations were quietly shut down, and certain locations were never spoken about again. Buck was known as the fearless rookie, the one willing to push forward when others hesitated. But as the seasons went on, viewers noticed something change. The jokes faded, the fear stopped looking playful, and the show itself began to feel heavier. Now, Buck has finally hinted at why. This isn't about monsters or myths. It's about patterns, erased evidence, and warnings that came from places no one expected. What he claims forces a disturbing question. Was Mountain Monsters documenting folklore or stumbling into something real that couldn't be controlled. Before we go any further, subscribe, because once you hear what Buck says really happened, you'll understand why some stories never get a proper ending. Before audiences ever knew him as the wide-eyed rookie willing to charge into the woods, Jacob Buck Lowe was something very different off camera. He wasn't raised on campfire stories meant to scare tourists. He grew up inside the Appalachian foothills where folklore wasn't entertainment, it was local memory. These were stories passed quietly, often with warnings attached. Places you didn't linger, ridges you didn't cross after dark, hollers where search parties went in and never found what they were looking for. Buck absorbed those stories early, but what separated him from others wasn't fear, it was curiosity. He didn't obsess over creatures. He obsessed over why the same locations kept producing the same kinds of stories across decades. As a teenager, he spent hours digging through county records, old newspapers, and handwritten church logs, looking for disappearances and accidents that never quite lined up with official explanations. Long before television, he was already mapping patterns. When Mountain Monsters began filming, Buck joined the team as the youngest and least experienced member. On screen, he was framed as comic relief, eager, fearless, sometimes reckless. It worked. Audiences loved him, but behind the scenes, Buck was doing something very different. While others focused on traps and theories, he started quietly cross-referencing filming locations with historical incidents, missing persons, mine collapses, restricted land purchases that didn't make sense for rural Appalachia. Producers initially dismissed it as overthinking. After all, the show wasn't meant to be an investigation, it was entertainment. But Buck didn't see it that way. To him, the cameras were just tools. The real question was why certain areas reacted the same way every time the team showed up. Equipment failures, sudden silence in the woods, locals refusing to speak once specific ridgelines were mentioned. By the second season, Buck had started keeping a private notebook. Not episode notes, not creature sketches, coordinates, dates, weather shifts, audio anomalies. He never talked about it on camera. When asked, he'd shrug it off with a joke. But crew members later admitted Buck was often the first to go quiet when something felt off, and the last to leave a location once filming stopped. What viewers didn't realize was that Buck wasn't trying to prove monsters were real. He was trying to understand why some places didn't behave like the rest of the world, and that mindset would eventually put him on a collision course with something far bigger than a television show. As Mountain Monsters gained popularity, the structure of the show stayed the same, but the atmosphere didn't. By the third and fourth seasons, something subtle had shifted, and Jacob Buck Lowe was one of the first to feel it. What once felt like stage tension began turning into genuine unease. The woods no longer reacted like a backdrop. They felt alert, as if the environment itself was aware of the crew's presence. On camera, the jokes still landed. The shouting, the running, the exaggerated reactions were all there. But between takes, Buck noticed patterns that couldn't be edited away. Equipment failures weren't random anymore. Cameras would shut down only in certain zones. Batteries drained within minutes in areas locals had warned them not to enter. Audio interference spiked at the same elevations, no matter which county they filmed in. To Buck, that consistency mattered. While the rest of the team focused on the hunt narrative, Buck started quietly comparing locations. He realized many of the most active sites shared strange similarities. Old mining corridors, abandoned rail lines, unexplained land acquisitions, and stretches of forest that appeared on maps but were rarely maintained. In some cases, official property records were incomplete or oddly redacted. That didn't happen by accident. Locals began acting differently too. Early seasons featured people eager to talk. Later shoots were met with silence. Doors closed. Conversations stopped the moment cameras appeared. In one instance, a landowner agreed to be interviewed, then backed out after a brief phone call Buck overheard him take. When asked why, the man simply said, "Y'all don't need to be here," and walked away. Buck started sleeping less. Crew members noticed him pacing at night, listening instead of talking. During one hunt, he refused to step into a clearing despite cameras rolling, quietly telling the others, "This isn't where we're supposed to be standing." That moment never aired. Producers said it slowed the episode. What disturbed Buck most was how often the fear felt anticipatory, not reactive. Sounds happened before movement. Silence fell before activity. It felt less like they were chasing something, and more like something was deciding whether to engage. When Buck raised these concerns privately, he was told not to overthink it. The show had a tone to maintain. But by then, Buck understood something critical. If this were just folklore, randomness would rule. Instead, the patterns were tightening, and when patterns tighten, it usually means something is being controlled. That realization marked the moment Buck stopped seeing Mountain Monsters as a show and started seeing it as a record of places people weren't meant to document. The breaking point came during an investigation that never made it to television. Internally, it was treated like any other case: a new location, local reports, and a build-up toward a nighttime hunt. But from the moment the crew arrived, Jacob Buck Lowe knew this one was different. The area felt restricted in a way that had nothing to do with posted signs or property lines. There were no warnings, yet everything about the place suggested they weren't supposed to be there. The first red flag was the absence of locals. In past investigations, someone always lingered nearby, curious onlookers, landowners, or neighbors watching from a distance. This time, the surrounding area was empty. No houses with lights on, no distant vehicles, just silence that felt deliberate. Buck later said it reminded him of land that had been quietly cleared, not abandoned. During setup, equipment issues began immediately. Thermal cameras showed movement with no heat source attached. Motion sensors triggered without recording anything. Audio picked up low-frequency interference that engineers couldn't trace. These weren't failures, the devices were functioning, just not in ways that made sense. Buck started documenting everything in a personal notebook, noting timestamps and locations the production logs ignored. The moment that changed everything happened after midnight. While reviewing live feeds, Buck noticed a humanoid shape on thermal, upright, still, and facing the crew. It didn't move like an animal. It didn't flee. It simply stood there, as if waiting. When Buck called it out, multiple cameras cut at once. The feeds went dark for nearly 2 minutes. When systems rebooted, the footage was gone. Producers initially blamed corruption, but Buck overheard an editor later say something that didn't sit right. There was a second copy. That copy, Buck was told, had been flagged and removed before the team even returned home. No explanation followed. The episode outline was rewritten within days. What should have been the central encounter was replaced with vague sounds, jump cuts, and a false alarm conclusion. Buck knew editing tricks. He could spot continuity errors instantly. Weather didn't match. Dialogue was missing. Reaction shots were reused out of sequence. The story had been altered to erase something specific. When Buck pushed back, he was told the same thing repeatedly. It doesn't fit the tone. But tone wasn't the issue. Control was. That unaired investigation marked the first time Buck realized decisions were being made above the production level. Someone outside the show had weighed in, and whatever they saw in that footage, they didn't want it explained or remembered. After the unaired investigation, things didn't return to normal. They tightened. Schedules became vague. Locations were changed without explanation. Certain areas Buck had flagged for follow-up were quietly removed from future plans. And then came the warning. It happened days before the next scheduled shoot. Jacob Buck Lowe received a call from an unlisted number. No caller ID, no voicemail afterward. The voice on the other end was calm, controlled, and unnervingly specific. The man addressed Buck by full name and referenced a location the crew hadn't announced publicly yet. Then he said something Buck would never forget. "You've already documented what you weren't supposed to. Don't push it further." The call ended without a threat, without emotion. That's what disturbed Buck the most. It wasn't intimidation, it was instruction. Buck tried to brush it off as a prank until he checked his phone records. The call didn't exist. No entry, no routing data. When he contacted his carrier, they claimed a temporary system error had occurred. The next day, even that explanation disappeared. The record was gone. He told a producer who dismissed it as coincidence. He told another crew member who joked about fans going too far. But when Buck finally told Trapper, the reaction was different. Trapper didn't laugh. He didn't question it. He simply went quiet before saying, "That means you're getting close." From that point on, Buck became hyper-aware of small details. Vehicles parked too long near their base camp. Drones that appeared briefly overhead before vanishing. Sudden radio interference whenever certain topics came up on set. None of it was dramatic enough to prove, but together it formed a pattern. During one filmed hunt, Buck broke character and spoke directly into the camera, saying, "If someone's watching this, maybe you should tell us why." That line never aired. Editors later claimed it disrupted the pacing. Buck knew better. It disrupted something else. Soon after, new non-disclosure agreements were issued. They were longer, stricter, and unusually broad. Language about unaired material, field anomalies, and external review appeared where it never had before. Buck realized the show wasn't just being produced anymore. It was being monitored, and whatever had been captured during that lost investigation hadn't scared the network. It had alerted someone else entirely. By the time Jacob Buck Lowe realized something was seriously wrong, it was already too late to stop it. The footage from the unaired investigation, the night everything shifted, had entered a phase Buck would later describe as disappearing while we were still standing there. In post-production, Buck requested to review the raw files himself. This wasn't unusual. Cast members had always been allowed to sit in on early cuts, especially when something significant happened in the field. But this time, the response was different. He was told the files were being stabilized. Then he was told they were temporarily locked for review. Then, finally, he was told something that made his stomach drop. The files were no longer accessible to the editing team at all. A longtime editor pulled Buck aside off the record and told him the truth in a whisper. A duplicate of the raw footage had been pulled directly from the server and encrypted, not by the network's usual post-production staff, but by an external party that logged in remotely. The file tag wasn't labeled by episode or date. It was marked restricted material. Within days, the episode outline was rewritten. Scenes were reordered. Dialogue no longer matched the environment. Night shots suddenly cut to daytime audio. What had been a central encounter was replaced with a vague false alarm narrative. Viewers later noticed it immediately. The episode felt wrong, incomplete, like it had been hollowed out. Buck confronted production about it. He wasn't angry yet, just confused. He asked a simple question: why are we pretending nothing happened? The response wasn't an answer. It was a warning. He was told continuing to push could jeopardize the show's future and his role in it. That was when Buck understood the stakes. This wasn't about entertainment quality or continuity errors. This was about removal, not editing, erasing. Soon after, a second editor quit abruptly. No explanation. His name vanished from the credits on the following episodes. Another staffer told Buck she'd been instructed never to discuss that investigation again, even internally. The phrase used was chillingly specific. It's not part of the record. Then came the final confirmation. Buck attempted to access his own personal backup drive, footage he'd copied in the field as a precaution. The drive powered on, spun, and then failed completely. A data specialist later told him the corruption pattern was unusual, resembling a targeted overwrite rather than random damage. By the end of that month, the footage was gone, not lost, not misplaced, removed. And the most disturbing part wasn't that the network allowed it to happen. It was that they seemed relieved when it was finally gone. After the footage vanished, Jacob Buck Lowe noticed something that unsettled him more than the lost files ever could. The energy on set changed, not dramatically, quietly, like a room where a conversation stops the moment someone walks in. Production meetings became closed door. Decisions that used to involve the whole Ames team were suddenly handled by people Buck didn't recognize. New faces appeared with vague titles: compliance, review, liaison. They didn't joke. They didn't watch monitors for entertainment. They watched people. Buck started feeling like the hunts were no longer being designed for discovery, but for control. Locations were restricted. Certain topics were discouraged before filming even began. When Buck asked why a promising site had been pulled from the schedule, he was told only that it raised concerns. Concerns for who? No one would say. The clearest sign came during a shoot, when Buck requested a copy of raw thermal drone footage. He'd seen something move through the tree line that didn't behave like any animal he knew. Tall, upright, too fast. The drone operator told him the feed had glitched. When Buck asked for the backup, he was informed it had already been reformatted. That had never happened before. Soon after, the team received updated filming guidelines. Buried deep in the language was a new restriction. Content involving non-verifiable biological entities was no longer approved for broadcast. The phrasing wasn't scientific. It wasn't legal. It felt governmental. Buck realized then that Mountain Monsters wasn't just being edited, it was being filtered. Even on camera, things felt different. Conversations were cut mid-thought. Equipment malfunctions Buck knew weren't natural were reframed as jokes. Moments of genuine fear were smoothed over in post-production. The show still looked the same to viewers, but to Buck, it felt staged in reverse. Reality being bent to fit a safer narrative. Behind the scenes, paranoia crept in. Buck noticed his phone behaving strangely, contacts disappearing, battery draining without explanation. Once he found his email inbox wiped clean of months of correspondence related to production. The network blamed a sync error. Buck didn't. He began writing everything down. Dates, names, incidents. He stopped trusting digital storage. If something happened, he wanted a record that couldn't be remotely altered. He also stopped talking freely on set, not because he was scared of the monsters, but because he no longer knew who might be listening. The final straw came when a producer told him, almost kindly, "You need to decide whether you want to keep making television or keep asking questions." That's when Buck understood the truth. Mountain Monsters hadn't uncovered something dangerous in the woods. It had crossed a line where someone else decided the story needed to stop being told. By the time the pressure peaked, Jacob Buck Lowe knew he was alone in his concern. Not because the others didn't sense something was wrong, but because they were choosing silence. New NDAs made speaking risky. Careers were on the line. Families were mentioned in meetings more than locations. Buck didn't blame them, but he couldn't do the same. He began asking questions anyway, quiet ones, off camera. He reached out to a former production assistant who admitted an outside group had accessed the show's servers. Not network, not legal, federal. The word wasn't explained. It didn't need to be. Another contact showed Buck a fragment of a server log listing mountain monsters alongside other media suppression cases. The label didn't reference folklore or entertainment. It referenced containment. That was the moment Buck stopped believing this was about ratings, liability, or image. It was about control. Soon after, he was warned again, this time indirectly. A producer told him certain conversations were being flagged. Another suggested he take time off. Buck refused. He'd come to a conclusion he couldn't walk back from. If the show stayed quiet, the truth disappeared. And Buck wasn't willing to let that happen, no matter what it cost him. After Buck refused to back down, the consequences came quietly. His screen time shrank. Meetings happened without him. Archived footage he requested was suddenly unavailable, then outright denied. When he hinted online that material had been removed, the posts vanished within hours, and his account was briefly locked for abnormal activity. No explanation followed. Soon after, Buck stepped away. Officially, it was personal time. In reality, the door had closed. Years later, Buck rarely speaks about mountain monsters. When he does, he avoids details. No creatures, no locations. He talks about patterns, about how fast truth disappears when it makes the wrong people uncomfortable. Fragments still surface now and then. A clipped frame, a mismatched line, a screenshot, only to be erased just as quickly, but the memory lingers. Buck once said, "The scariest thing we found wasn't in the woods. It was how easily everyone agreed to pretend it wasn't real." The show didn't end with a finale. It ended with silence. And somewhere between the missing footage and the edits that followed, Buck learned the truth. Some monsters don't chase you. They erase you. According to Jacob Buck Lowe, what happened behind the cameras was never meant to be part of a TV show. Footage disappeared. Investigations were quietly shut down, and certain locations were never spoken about again. Buck was known as the fearless rookie, the one willing to push forward when others hesitated. But as the seasons went on, viewers noticed something change. The jokes faded, the fear stopped looking playful, and the show itself began to feel heavier. Now, Buck has finally hinted at why. This isn't about monsters or myths. It's about patterns, erased evidence, and warnings that came from places no one expected. What he claims forces a disturbing question. Was Mountain Monsters documenting folklore, or stumbling into something real that couldn't be controlled? Before we go any further, subscribe, because once you hear what Buck says really happened, you'll understand why some stories never get a proper ending. In September 2014, the Mountain Monsters crew filmed an episode in Wirt County, West Virginia, investigating reports of the Yahoo cryptid that would never air on Destination America. Subscribe now, because what the cameras captured during that investigation was so dangerous, so controversial, and so disturbing that network executives banned the episode immediately, ordered all footage locked away, and threatened legal action against anyone who discussed what happened. For 9 years, the episode remained hidden until leaked footage surfaced online in 2023. This is what really happened during the banned Mountain Monsters episode that the network desperately tried to keep secret. Mountain Monsters premiered on Destination America in 2013, following a team of Appalachian hunters and trappers known as the Appalachian Investigators of Mysterious Sightings, or AIMS team, as they tracked cryptids throughout the mountain regions of West Virginia, Kentucky, Virginia, and surrounding states. The show featured team leader John Trapper Tice, along with investigators Jeff Headley, William Wild Bill Neff, Joseph Huckleberry Lott, Jacob Buck Lowe, and Willie McQuillian. The format combined cryptid investigation with trap building, following the team as they interviewed witnesses, searched remote wilderness areas, and constructed elaborate traps attempting to capture creatures including Bigfoot variants, the Mothman, lizard demons, and other Appalachian cryptids. By season 2 in 2014, the show had developed a successful formula and dedicated following, leading producers to become increasingly ambitious about the creatures they would investigate and the risks the team would take during filming. In late summer 2014, producers planned an episode focusing on the Yahoo, a violent Bigfoot-like creature reported in Wirt County, West Virginia, with a reputation for being far more aggressive than typical Bigfoot encounters. Local legends described the Yahoo not as a shy forest dweller, but as a territorial predator that had allegedly attacked humans, killed livestock brutally, and defended its territory with extreme violence. Multiple witnesses had reported encounters where the Yahoo charged at people rather than fleeing, threw rocks with deadly accuracy, and made terrifying vocalizations that sounded like screaming combined with growling. The Ames team had investigated aggressive cryptids before, but the Yahoo reports suggested something genuinely dangerous rather than just frightening. Producers were aware of the risks, but believed the team's experience and the dramatic footage potential justified proceeding with the investigation. The plan was to conduct a week-long investigation in the remote Wirt County wilderness, build a large trap designed to contain something extremely strong and violent, and attempt to capture evidence of the Yahoo through nighttime tracking and provocation. What producers didn't anticipate was how quickly the situation would spiral completely out of control, resulting in injuries, production equipment destruction, and footage so disturbing that network legal teams would determine it could never be broadcast. The investigation began in early September 2014, with the team arriving in Wirt County and setting up base camp in an area where Yahoo sightings had been concentrated. Local witnesses warned them that the creature was not like other cryptids they had investigated, that it was genuinely dangerous and had put people in the hospital with injuries from thrown rocks and physical attacks. Trapper dismissed the warnings as exaggeration, confident the team's experience would keep them safe. On the second night of filming, the Ames team conducted a nighttime investigation in dense forest approximately 2 miles from their base camp, spreading out in pairs with night vision cameras to cover more ground and increase chances of encountering the Yahoo. Wild Bill and Buck were investigating a ravine area where witnesses had reported recent activity when something happened that was captured on both their handheld cameras and a static camera that had been positioned overlooking the ravine. The footage, which would later become the primary reason the episode was banned, shows Wild Bill and Buck hearing something large moving through brush approximately 50 yards from their position. Following standard protocol, they called out attempting to communicate and provoke response. What happened next occurred with shocking speed. A large dark figure emerged from the tree line and charged directly toward Wild Bill and Buck, covering the distance in seconds while both men were scrambling backward trying to retreat. The night vision footage clearly shows both investigators falling as they tried to run, with Wild Bill hitting the ground hard. The figure reached Wild Bill's position while he was down. What the camera captured next was Wild Bill screaming in pain and terror while something off-camera was attacking him. Buck's camera shows him trying to reach Wild Bill but being unable to get close because of the figure that appears to be striking or grabbing Wild Bill repeatedly. The attack lasted approximately 15 seconds before the figure retreated back into darkness. When Buck finally reached Wild Bill, the cameras captured Wild Bill bleeding from multiple injuries, barely conscious, and in severe distress. The footage shows Buck calling frantically for help over radio, trying to assess Wild Bill's injuries while also watching the darkness in case the creature returned. Wild Bill had deep lacerations on his arms and torso that were bleeding heavily, later determined to be consistent with being struck by something with tremendous force or possibly clawed. He had a head injury where he had been knocked to the ground, and he was going into shock from the trauma and blood loss. The rest of the team reached their location within 10 minutes, bringing first aid supplies and helping to stabilize Wild Bill enough to move him. The decision was made to evacuate him immediately to the nearest hospital, rather than waiting for emergency services to navigate the remote location. The cameras captured the chaotic evacuation through dark forest, with Wild Bill being half carried by team members while everyone watched the darkness expecting another attack at any moment. This footage alone, showing a clear, violent attack on an investigator resulting in serious injuries, was enough to make network executives extremely nervous about airing the episode, but it was only the beginning of what would make the episode unbroadcastable. Wild Bill was transported to Camden Clark Medical Center approximately 45 minutes from the investigation site, arriving in the emergency department around 2 in the morning with injuries that required immediate treatment and raised serious questions among medical staff about what could have caused such trauma. The medical documentation, which later became part of the legal controversy around the episode, showed Wild Bill had sustained 4 deep lacerations on his left forearm, ranging from 4 to 7 inches in length, 2 lacerations on his right shoulder and upper chest, significant bruising across his torso consistent with blunt force trauma, a concussion from the head impact when he fell, and was treated for shock and blood loss. The lacerations required over 40 stitches total to close. Most significantly for the controversy that would follow, the attending physician documented that the wound patterns were unusual and didn't match typical injuries from falls, animal attacks, or accidental trauma from branches or rocks. The lacerations showed characteristics of being caused by something striking with considerable force in a downward motion, creating tears in the skin rather than clean cuts or typical claw marks. This documentation would later become crucial when network lawyers were determining whether the show could be held liable for putting cast members in situations that resulted in serious injury. While Wild Bill was being treated, production supervisors were having emergency discussions about whether to continue filming or shut down the investigation immediately. The standard practice for reality television when cast members are injured is to halt production, conduct safety reviews, and only resume if conditions can be made safe. However, the remaining Ames team members, particularly Trapper, insisted they needed to continue the investigation to document what had attacked Wild Bill and to prove they hadn't fabricated the incident. This created tension between the production team and network executives who were being updated about the situation in real time. The decision was made to pause filming for 24 hours while Wild Bill was evaluated, and while producers assessed whether continuing was safe and legally defensible. During this pause, something happened that would make the episode even more controversial and contribute to it being banned. Several team members, including Buck, who had witnessed the attack firsthand, began questioning whether they should continue putting themselves at risk for a television show. Buck expressed concerns on camera during interviews that what they encountered wasn't just an animal or even a typical cryptid, but something that appeared to be hunting them specifically and targeting them with intelligence and malicious intent. He stated he believed they had provoked something that was now actively trying to hurt or kill them, and that continuing the investigation would lead to someone being seriously injured or killed. Despite Wild Bill's hospitalization and Buck's serious concerns about safety, Trapper made the decision that the team would continue the investigation after the 24-hour pause, arguing that walking away would mean the attack on Wild Bill had been for nothing, and that they had an obligation to document what was in those woods. This decision created the first major conflict in Mountain Monsters history between team members, captured on camera in footage that network executives later determined could not be aired because it showed how production was prioritizing dramatic television over cast safety. The footage shows Buck and Trapper having a heated argument where Buck explicitly states he believes continuing is reckless and potentially fatal, while Trapper insists they can take additional precautions and that they owe it to Wild Bill to finish what they started. Buck ultimately agreed to continue but stated on camera that he was doing so against his better judgment and that if anyone else got hurt, the responsibility would fall on Trapper and the producers who were allowing this to continue. Production made several safety modifications for the continuation of filming. Additional crew members were brought in to maintain visual contact between team members at all times. Medical personnel were on standby closer to the investigation site. Team members were equipped with air horns and other deterrent devices, and critically, team members were authorized to carry firearms for self-defense, something that had not been done on previous Mountain Monsters investigations. This last modification would prove to be the most controversial aspect of the entire episode, and a primary reason it could never be broadcast. On the third night after Wild Bill's attack, the team returned to the investigation area with modified protocols and additional safety measures. The plan was to set up a large trap structure designed to contain something extremely strong, then conduct nighttime surveillance and tracking to document the Yahoo's behavior and potentially lure it toward the trap. Trapper, Buck, Huckleberry, and Jeff participated in this phase, while Willie remained at base camp monitoring communications. What happened during this third night created footage that was so problematic from legal, ethical, and broadcast standards perspectives that network executives immediately ordered all footage seized and locked away. The team had been working on the trap construction for several hours when they began hearing vocalizations from multiple directions surrounding their position. The sounds were described as howling mixed with screaming, coming from at least 3 different locations in a pattern that suggested coordination rather than random animal sounds. Trapper made the decision to split the team into pairs to investigate the different sound sources, hoping to triangulate the Yahoo's location. This decision, made against the safety protocols that had been established after Wild Bill's injury, put team members in vulnerable positions separated from each other in darkness, while something that had already demonstrated violent intent was in the area. Approximately 20 minutes after the team split up to investigate the surrounding vocalizations, a gunshot rang out in the darkness, captured on multiple cameras from different positions and creating a moment that would define why this episode could never be broadcast. The audio from multiple sources clearly captured a single gunshot, followed immediately by Buck's voice screaming for everyone to get to his location immediately. The footage shows team members running through dark forest toward Buck's position, with cameras capturing the chaos and fear as everyone tried to navigate through dense woods while not knowing what had happened or whether there was ongoing danger. When cameras reached Buck's location, the footage shows him standing over something on the ground with his rifle still raised, clearly in shock, and Jeff arriving moments later asking what happened. The footage, which has been described by people who have seen it, but which has never been publicly released, apparently shows a large, dark figure lying motionless on the ground, approximately 10 feet from Buck's position. Buck's account, captured on camera in the immediate aftermath, states that he was investigating the vocalizations when the figure charged at him from close range, giving him only seconds to react. He states he feared for his life based on what had happened to Wild Bill and fired one shot at center mass to stop the charge. The figure went down immediately and did not move. The footage from the next several minutes is reportedly the most controversial in the entire episode, showing the team's reaction as they approached the figure to determine what Buck had shot. Multiple cameras captured the scene from different angles as team members used flashlights to examine what was on the ground. According to descriptions from people who have seen the unaired footage, what the cameras revealed was not clearly a known animal, not clearly a person in a costume, but something ambiguous enough that it created massive legal and ethical problems for the network. If Buck had shot an unknown animal, that would create wildlife law violations and potential criminal charges. If he had shot what appeared to be a person, even if that person was in a costume and charging at him, that would create potential manslaughter or assault charges. If he had shot an actual cryptid, that would raise questions about why the body wasn't preserved and turned over to scientific authorities. The ambiguity of what was actually shown on camera made the footage impossible to broadcast without creating catastrophic liability for everyone involved. The production team made the decision to shut down filming immediately and secure the scene. Local authorities were not initially contacted, a decision that would later become extremely controversial. Instead, production supervisors contacted network executives and legal teams who began emergency consultations about what to do with the footage and how to handle the situation. In the 72 hours following the shooting incident, Destination America network executives, production company lawyers, and crisis management consultants engaged in intensive damage control to prevent the Mountain Monsters episode from becoming a public relations disaster and potential legal catastrophe. The first action taken was securing all footage from the investigation under lock and key, with explicit orders that no copies were to be made and no footage was to be reviewed without legal counsel present. All crew members present during the investigation, including the Ames team members and production staff, were required to sign expanded non-disclosure agreements with severe financial penalties for discussing what had occurred during filming. These NDAs reportedly included liquidated damages clauses in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per violation, effectively silencing everyone involved through the threat of financial ruin if they spoke publicly about the banned episode. Wild Bill, who was still recovering from his injuries in the hospital, was visited by network representatives who secured his signature on similar agreements and reportedly offered financial compensation beyond his standard appearance fees in exchange for his cooperation in keeping the incident confidential. The question of what to do about the shooting itself and whether to involve law enforcement created intense internal debate. Legal counsel advised that if what Buck shot was an animal, West Virginia wildlife laws would require reporting the incident and likely result in criminal charges for hunting violations given that the shooting occurred at night, potentially involved an endangered or protected species if it was determined to be an unknown primate, and occurred in an area where hunting may not have been permitted. If what Buck shot appeared to be a person, or could be interpreted as a person in a costume, failure to report the shooting could constitute obstruction of justice or accessory after the fact to a potential crime. The decision was ultimately made to not involve local law enforcement based on the argument that the figure had charged at Buck in what was determined to be legitimate self-defense, that no body could be located when the area was searched the following day during daylight hours, suggesting whatever was shot had retreated and survived the encounter, and that involving authorities would inevitably lead to public disclosure of the footage, which would create the exact liability exposure the network was trying to avoid. This decision, while legally questionable, was based on risk assessment that the potential consequences of reporting were worse than the potential consequences of not reporting. To justify the decision not to report, extensive searches searches were conducted of the area where the shooting occurred, documented through photographs and video that would serve as evidence that the network had acted reasonably in determining no crime had occurred. These searches found no body, no blood trail, and no physical evidence that anything had been shot and killed. Network executives and legal teams identified multiple independent reasons why the banned Mountain Monsters episode could not be aired under any circumstances, creating a situation where the footage became permanently locked away rather than simply delayed or edited for content. The primary legal concern involved liability for Wild Bill's injuries and the question of whether the network had exercised adequate duty of care in protecting cast members from foreseeable harm. Reality television productions have legal obligations to maintain reasonably safe working conditions for participants, and courts have found networks liable when cast members are injured during filming if it can be shown the production created or failed to mitigate unreasonable risks. Wild Bill's injuries were serious enough that if the episode aired showing the circumstances that led to the attack, it could be used as evidence in a potential lawsuit that the production had knowingly put cast members in dangerous situations for entertainment value. Even if Wild Bill chose not to sue, regulatory agencies or insurance companies could potentially take action based on the documented safety failures. The shooting incident created even more severe legal problems. Regardless of what Buck actually shot, the footage showing a cast member discharging a firearm during production raised questions about weapons protocols, safety procedures, and whether the network could be held responsible for whatever consequences resulted. If the shooting was legally justified self-defense, airing the footage could still create public relations disasters and potentially subject Buck to criminal investigation if prosecutors decided to review the case. If the shooting was not justified, airing footage documenting a potential crime would make the network complicit. The ambiguity of what was shown in the footage made it impossible to defend airing the episode from any angle. Beyond the shooting itself, the footage showing team members arguing about safety and expressing concerns about continuing the investigation would directly contradict the network's position that adequate safety measures were in place, broadcasting Buck's on-camera statement that continuing the investigation was reckless and could lead to someone being killed, followed immediately by footage of the shooting incident, would create devastating evidence of negligence if legal action was taken. The ethical concerns were equally prohibitive. Destination America marketed Mountain Monsters as entertainment about cryptid hunting, maintaining ambiguity about whether the creatures were real or the show was staged performance. The banned episode's footage was too graphic and too realistic to maintain that ambiguity. If what was shown was real, airing it would be broadcasting actual violence and potential death for entertainment. If what was shown was staged, it would constitute fraud against viewers and potentially violate FCC regulations about disclosure of staged content in unscripted programming. Network standards and practices departments determined the violence shown was too intense for the network's target demographic and time slots regardless of context. For 9 years, the banned Mountain Monsters episode remained locked away with only network executives, legal team members, and participants knowing what the footage contained. The Ames team continued filming subsequent seasons without publicly acknowledging the banned episode, though observers noted format changes after season 2, reducing aggressive cryptid confrontations and increasing safety protocols. Wild Bill recovered from injuries and returned to the show, but was noticeably more cautious and refused to discuss Wirt County when asked by fans. Buck remained with the show but showed less enthusiasm for night investigations and became more vocal about safety concerns during filmed episodes. Then, in March 2023, partial footage from the banned episode appeared on social media platforms and file-sharing sites, uploaded by anonymous sources and spreading rapidly through paranormal investigation communities and Mountain Monsters fan groups before network legal teams could issue takedown notices. The leaked footage was incomplete and lower resolution than broadcast quality, suggesting it had been copied from production files rather than master footage, but showed enough key incidents to confirm years of rumors about why the episode was banned. The leaked material included approximately 8 minutes showing Wild Bill's attack and immediate aftermath with graphic injuries visible. The heated argument between Buck and Trapper about continuing the investigation with Buck explicitly stating someone would be killed. Audio of the gunshot and chaotic response with team members screaming and running through darkness, and brief, unclear footage of something on the ground that viewers debated endlessly. Notably absent from leaked material was any clear view of the figure Buck shot, suggesting whoever leaked the footage either didn't have access access to that specific content or deliberately withheld the most legally problematic material. Destination America issued immediate DMCA takedown notices and released a brief statement acknowledging unreleased Mountain Monsters footage had been leaked without authorization, investigating how the breach occurred, but notably did not deny the footage was authentic or address specific content shown. AIM's team members did not comment publicly, presumably bound by non-disclosure agreements, though fans noted Wild Bill's social media presence decreased significantly after the leak and Buck deleted his Facebook account entirely.